Welcome to the Come Up Starter Kit, guys. My name is Shankar and I have a wonderful guest with me today, Tiff, who is a food technologist, and we're going to learn a little bit about what it takes to actually become a food technologist. Thank you, Tiff, for jumping on board.
Thank you for having me, Shankar. I'm so excited to be part of the podcast.
Wonderful. Now, Tiff, for people that may not know what food technology is, what is food technology?
So food technology is like the other side of cooking. Basically, it's all of the science and all of the work that goes on in the background. It's pretty much what goes into recipe development, what goes into making a food go onto a massive scale, and all of the food safety work that goes on behind scenes.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, wonderful. Now, you've had a bit of an interesting career. You started in something, well, still quite very much related, but then moved into food tech. Maybe give the people a bit of a rundown in terms of your career journey.
So I've been around the whole food world, I would say. I started off in hospitality as a barista, and then I moved on to be a bartender, a waitress, and then finally a chef, a baker, and a pastry chef. And then I moved on to doing food science, where I'm working now as a food technologist.
Yeah, cool. And how did you sort of, I guess, make that pivot? Because you're doing some cool stuff when you're a chef. How did you make that pivot into them wanting to get into food technology?
So my passion for food technology really started when I was working in fine dining. I was doing some restaurant work, doing experimental desserts and foods that really rely on their ingredient function to bring the whole dish together.
Yeah.
Before I had worked in the restaurant scene, I didn't really know much about why you would use a certain ingredient, how a certain ingredient interacts with another one. And learning about this is really what got my passion towards food technology. And that's finding out the why of food instead of the what of food.
Okay, wonderful. And I guess in terms of why food technology exists, why would you say that it exists, and why does it play an important part to our society at the moment?
The two biggest reasons I would say would be for quality and for food safety.
Yeah.
So on the quality side, you want to make sure that the product is exactly the same every single time it's produced. So as a consumer, you know what to expect, you've had it before, and you know you'll get the same thing again. And then on the food safety side is making sure that it's safe to eat, basically, so that there's nothing nasty inside it, that you know that the shelf life is going to last it the whole way through, and that if you have an allergy, you know that the food that you're eating will be free from that allergy if it says that it is.
Yeah, very good. Okay, and so for people that may want to know what a day in a life looks like in your shoes, what does that look like?
My day starts off with a group meeting in the factory with our production staff. So we go together and we talk about what's going to happen for the day. So what products we're making, what products we're packing, what products are being picked up by our couriers, and what's next for what's going on to our production plan the next couple of days. My role in that is to talk about quality. I work in quality assurance in my workplace, and that means that I'm taking every sample of every batch that's made, making it up to the way the consumer would see it, and then checking that against an old version of that food product to make sure it's exactly the same.
Right. So people would come to you with a specific product that they, love and want to share with people. And then your job is essentially to try and make a cut copy of as close to as that product as you can, whilst making it obviously in a safe manner.
Yeah. So a big part of what you've described is product development.
Right.
So that's a little bit less what I do personally, but that does come into a big aspect of food technology. So that's when a customer would come to you and say, I have this great, let's say, hot chocolate product. Can you make one for me and my business that's really similar? And that's when you would work through, all right, well, what goes into it? We know we've got cocoa, we know we've got sugar. We try and figure out the ratios, if there's anything else that goes in. And then we do what's called sensory analysis, which is when you test it by taste, sight, smell, feeling. All of your senses get involved, hence the name.
Right.
Yeah, and then we can see if it does act the same as the original product.
Okay, and so does that mean that you're doing a whole lot of tasting as well?
So much tasting.
Right.
I am a dentist's worst nightmare. In my line of work, we do a lot of sugary foods and drinks, and I taste every single one of them twice every day.
So why is it twice? And what is, I guess, what are you looking for when you're doing those tasting elements or that sensory profiling?
So the reason we do it twice is we have what's called a control, and that's the one that we know is exactly the way it should be. It tastes right, it smells right, it looks right, it's safe, it's within its date. So we always have one on hand of the product in its best form. And then we compare that to what's called recent production. So that might be what you've made that day. And then you taste them side by first having your control and thinking, okay, so I know it's this sweet, it's this sour, it's this hot, it's this cold, all of those aspects. And then you take a sip of your next one or a taste, depending on the food. And you say, all right, well, I think it's coming off the same amount of sweetness, or I'm getting a really dry feeling in my mouth, or is that the same as the first one? And then you drop back to the control, you try that again, and you just keep going between the two to make sure that you're getting the same sensory profile as each other.
Right. And so how long can that take in terms of actually trying to get it back to the original?
So I would say it can be as fast as even 10, 20 seconds, if you really know what you're looking for, because ideally your product's going to be identical, but it can take even half an hour sometimes. It really depends. In my workplace, 2 people will always taste every sample to make sure that we've got a second opinion. And if we think anything might be up with it, we always get a 3rd and 4th opinion. So that in itself takes a while. And then we'll have a discussion about, well, I thought that maybe it was a little bit more sour. I thought that the texture was a bit more firm. And then we work back from there.
Okay. And so now you mentioned that, I guess there's a number of processes when it comes to your line of work. So I guess in food technology as a whole, and doubling down into your specific role, how many different sort of processes are there until you get to the end result?
In my role, there's not too many, because in a perfect situation when you've got a day when nothing goes wrong, I'll be taking a sample on those great days.
Yeah, on those great days, yeah, exactly right.
So I'll be taking a sample from the factory floor of what they've just made, and then I do my comparison as I've just described, and then I have to take a whole bunch of notes about what I tasted, who else tasted it with me, what time it was, have I checked off every ingredient that went through. So those are the main processes I do in quality testing. And then the other side of my job is the paperwork, which isn't really as fun. So that's just making sure that all of my batch codes are lining up, all of the recipes have been followed correctly, all of the signatures have been taken down, just the bureaucratic side of it.
Yeah, okay. And so you've got your role. How many other departments are there, I guess, in that whole process line? You mentioned that there's also that food production element as well. What other ones are there?
So the other main ones would be the food safety side and the product development side.
Okay.
Our product development team is the one that starts off that process when you've come to us and said, I want to make a product that's just like this one. Yeah. So then they're the ones that are going to figure out what's in your recipe, what your dosage is going to be, how you could package it, and all of the technical work. Then there's quality, which is myself. I take it and sample it after production. And then there's food safety. So that sort of testing happens after all of the sensory testing. So that's looking for things like, is there any dairy in a product that says that it's dairy free? Right. Or do you have any microbiology problems to say that maybe we're going to be growing some mold if this goes past its shelf life?
Oh, right. Interesting. Okay. So you have to even take into consideration that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so that's so interesting. So then you're saying that if a product would go past its due date and, the things of like mold can come about, how do you take that into consideration?
There's a process called shelf life testing that works all of that out. So when we make a new product for the very first time, we do quite a lot of microbiological testing. We test for chemistry limits, so things like acidity or moisture, and that all of that sort of stuff really plays into what bugs might be able to grow, what yeast could come up, what molds could grow, just anything you don't want in your food.
Exactly.
So we establish limits to say that, well, if you find underneath this amount of yeast or mold in parts per million, then we can accept it, because based on research, we know that after a certain period of time, if there's no moisture and it's stored properly, the shelf life should be, say, 2 years, for example. So we'll always start with a minimum shelf life for a new product. And then if we can test after, say, it's 6 months shelf life, we're looking at maybe 8 months. Oh, all of that testing has shown us it's still totally safe and the quality's good. Cool, we can extend the shelf life. And then we'll test it again at 12 months and then at 15 months and so on.
So this process can take quite a long time then, until you know, from inception throughout the door. This can actually take a while.
Yeah, some products do take several years just to get off the ground.
Oh, wow.
But then on the flip side, some products can be quite fast, especially what we call copycats. So that's you coming to us and saying, they've got a great product, I want that product.
And do you find that a lot, that people will just copycat?
A little bit, but in a sense, it's kind of hard not to, because if you're talking like a hot chocolate, how different can you get, you know, beyond saying, oh, I want it darker, or I want it sweeter, or I want it milkier. There's not as much as you can change around. But say for a snack food product, well, that's when you're going to have to start developing something really unique, because you can't just say, take one of the leading snack foods and say, well, that's mine.
And so are these generally large scale companies that come to you, or are these even just like mum and pop shops that are like, you know, I bake these cookies and I want the rest of the world to try my cookies as well?
It's actually a great mix of both of them. We work with some very big brands in Australia, but then we also have a couple of small businesses that say, like, as you said, like, I've got a great cookie recipe. I want to make this into a packet recipe that people can have at home and just add their own eggs and butter and we're done. Or we get people that say they run a shop and they sell a food product and they want to just streamline their process. So maybe you make great cakes, but now you want us to make your cake mix. So all you have to do is add the wet ingredients in your shop. So we do different levels, from consumer goods up to retail and commercial scaling.
Right. And so this will cover drinks, food items, even like powdered form items and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So it's a whole shebang.
Yeah. So my company specializes in dry powders.
Right.
So that's your things like hot chocolate mixes or cake mixes, protein blends, that sort of stuff. And then what happens in maybe the next company that we blend for, or maybe for the consumer, is they add their own wet product. So, you know, they're adding their eggs to the cake, or they're adding the water to their protein shake.
Right. Okay. So I probably should dial back. You have obviously been in the food world for a while. You're a chef. Then you pivoted into food technology. I guess you have an interesting story, as in terms of when you were a chef and then you wanted to pivot. What sort of initially created you to pivot? And then did you have to study in order to get into food tech?
Yeah, so initially I thought I could keep expanding on my interest in ingredient function through being a chef. But because of the pandemic, I lost my job, and that was pretty sudden. Everyone sort of says you'll never lose a job in hospitality because everyone needs to eat. But, you know, the world saw a different side of things at that point. So when that happened, I actually caught myself at home in lockdown just looking up, like, what is the chemical structure of this sugar? Or how does that sweetener work? I'm just thinking, why am I not studying this? This is not the first time I've looked up this stuff. And I think I've expanded to the level of knowledge that I could get on my own without studying. So I actually took the plunge and enrolled in the Diploma of Food Science and Technology at William Angliss Institute. I studied my certificate 3 and 4 of cookery and patisserie at William Angliss, so I was familiar with the college, and I knew that they offered the food science course. So I had a look at that. I saw it was only 12 months full time. So I thought, you know what, if I don't like it, it's only 12 months and it's the lockdown 12 months. So let's do something fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And would you say that was like, for someone that may be interested in also following that same certificate, is it quite cumbersome in the sense that it's, you know, a whole lot of chemistry involved and stuff like that?
I think that the diploma has a really good balance of hands-on work and more book work. And I say that because I was really nervous to go into a science course with
Yeah.
not much of a maths background. That was my biggest concern. And they definitely helped out a lot with that. And I think being at a diploma level instead of jumping into a bachelor really accommodates that sort of stuff. So we had a lot of help in class as well, if it was required, to go that extra mile and teach you more of the foundations of some of the maths and science areas. And I found that with the maths foundation, all of the science came naturally.
Oh, wow.
But in the course, it was really hands-on. So for me, I'm very much a practical person.
Yeah.
It made everything make so much more sense to be able to say, all right, here's the theory. It looks like chemistry jargon. Now let's go into the lab and make sense of it.
Yeah, right. Okay. And then it sort of just like fell in your brain nicely because you could understand and make sense of it all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. I remember because so funny enough, when I finished school, I actually wanted to do food tech as well. But then at the university, there was like chem and all this stuff and mathematics. And I'm like, no, I can't like, and that scared me. So I was like, there's no way that I'm going to do that. So I completely understand. In terms of when you finished your course, how long or how quickly did it take for you to then find a job?
I actually started working where I am now while I was studying.
Oh, wow.
It was about 3 months before we were due to graduate that I reached out to my lecturers and I said, hey, I'm interested in some work experience. Do you know anyone that might be looking, or do you have any advice for how I could go about finding that? Because it's a little bit different doing a resume drop when you're working in a field where food safety especially matters so much. It's a bit hard to just walk on into a place.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so one of my lecturers put me in touch with my now workplace. I was there 2 days a week, just helping out in the lab, getting to learn the ropes. And when I graduated, they offered me full time. So I've been there since then.
Okay. And so then what does a career pathway look like for you? So you've obviously finished your course and now working. Is there, for people that may be like, okay, well, I may not like specifically what you do, but there's other areas of it that sounds pretty cool. What other streams can people do when it comes to food tech?
There's quite a lot that people can do. The two main avenues are quality and product development, and then all of the little jobs in between them. So if you're not so much into quality, which is what I do, product development tends to be in more of the retail sector. So I
Right.
know some people that did my course and now they're working for companies like David Jones and Maya and developing their boutique foods for them.
Oh, well,
Um,
yes.
yeah, so I am interested in the quality because I really like problem solving. So
Yeah,
that suits
right.
me. But for people that want to do more of the creative side or the expressive side or the marketing side, there's definitely work there. And I think it's a matter of just reaching out to anyone you know that might be able to help, in my case, my lecturers, and just seeing what's there, because getting any experience initially is really helpful. So even if you do just a month or so of a work placement, that gives you a foot in the door to move on to something else. And then you can say, hey, I'm new here. I'm really keen to learn. I've tried this and I want to try that.
Yeah, right. Okay. So you mentioned two interesting components where your side was probably more problem solving, and then there's a creative side nature to it. If someone was interested in this line of work, is there a particular person or I guess personality that you think that would be best suited for this particular type of industry?
I definitely think anyone with good critical thinking skills, that's
Right.
going to help so much. Even if you're not working so much in the problem solving line of things, you need to be able to think of creative solutions, because in food technology, you can't really just say, here's my product, I'm releasing it. There's actually a lot of legal stuff that surrounds it. And that's what helps keep our food really safe. So, for example, if you want to say, I'm going to make a meal replacement shake, it's going to help people lose weight, and then you can have it for breakfast instead of eating a meal. You can't just throw anything in there. There has to be a certain amount of nutrition. There has to be a certain amount of energy. There has to be a certain size of a serving. So I definitely think critical thinking is going to help a lot, because that's when you get to say, well, I want this product to be this flavor, but I have to fit in this kind of nutrition. If I do that, how can I work around this other problem? So it's very multifaceted. So yeah, critical thinking, I definitely think, is going to help someone the most in this field.
Yeah, very good. Now, this is probably like a completely off topic from what we're doing, but when I see like things like, especially around like oat milk and like soy milk, and they've got agents like thickening agents or stuff like that, are they relatively safe, and are those things that you would sort of manage in that process?
Yeah, things like that are very safe.
Right.
There's definitely a bit of a bad reputation for food additives,
Yeah.
and some of them are a little bit deserved, I would say.
Okay.
But you've got to consider the quantities of these things you're having. So maybe you don't want to be having an enormous amount of a food coloring, for example, but how much are you having? So
Yeah.
there's a tiny, tiny amount in a food product that you might eat, and then you're only going to eat a certain portion size of that, and maybe you don't even eat it every day. So I think it does get a worse rap than it deserves. But for things like gums, they also really have a function, or any food additive. A food company isn't just going to throw it in for the sake of it, especially when people don't necessarily like it. So with your example of the oat milk, a gum would be in there to make sure that it doesn't turn to sediment at the bottom and then water at the top. It keeps it suspended. So these additives as well could be pretty expensive. And a food company just will not throw anything into a food product that does not absolutely need to be there.
Yeah, interesting. Now, I wanted to actually touch on another pretty cool topic. Now, this is the second time me and Tiff have done this. I stuffed up the first time, but there was a second time where we actually were just chatting, where food coloring, well, I think it was the red, where it's actually made from an insect, right?
Yeah, that one's called carmine. So that's a natural red color. As far as I know, it's one of the only natural red colors. I think there's another called carmazine, but I'm not so familiar with that one. But carmine is in so much. It's a really interesting coloring agent because it's very stable. So that means if you throw it into a really acidic food, it's not going to turn blue, which is just a quirk of some of the red and purple colorings. They just change color when it's acidic. But carmine is not vegan, and a lot of vegan confectionaries really want to use natural colors. And that's sort of the standstill you get to is, well, if you want a vegan and natural color, don't make it red. Why?
Right.
Carmine comes from insects. So carmine comes from, I've forgotten the name of it, but it's an insect that lives on the prickly pear cactus. And to make this food color, it's not like people are just going out into the wild and picking up bugs. They're pretty much lab grown.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, so they're raised under hygienic conditions, and they're always going to be raised to a certain standard. But some people are also allergic to it because this bug technically is related to the crustacean family. So it's just a really interesting food color because on its own, it's safe, but it's not vegan, and some people have allergies to it.
So does that mean that in your line of work, just how that you found that coloring from that insect, is that also, I guess, involved in your line of work where you will try and go find out where you can source colors from, whether it be from insects or whatever else?
Not so much for what I do.
Yeah.
So in my line of work, we have, well, in fact, in all food science jobs, you have what's called an approved supplier. So that means we buy our colors in from a place that makes colors. They specialize in colors and flavors. And we know that they've got all of their accreditations. They've done all their food safety checks. They're the real deal. So they're not just out picking up bugs.
Right. Right.
So with that, every time we order an ingredient such as the colors, we get what's called a certificate of analysis. That is a document that we check that tells us that there's an acceptable level of any microbiological life, that the color is within specification, that the moisture is what it says it should be, just all of those little details that mean that every batch of this product is going to be identical. And when we put it into our food product, it's not going to cause us any issues. So in that, it would say typically if it's animal, or insect, or oceanic derived, or anything like that. And it will also say if there's any dietary issues.
So in your line of work, does that mean that you're dealing with a whole range of stakeholders?
Yeah, it does. So in my line of work, we're dealing with our small clients, for example, the cafes that ask us to make just one special product for their cafe, or our major stakeholders like the big companies that we make really well-known products for. We're also dealing with uh, people that we call co-packers. So they take some of our product and they pack it on.
Right.
And yeah, and then of course there's our investors for the business.
Yeah, lovely. Okay. And so when you look at your role, what would you say are the major challenges?
In my role, I would definitely say the problem solving aspect could be the major challenge.
Right.
It's sort of a double-edged sword. I think it's probably part of the appeal of what I do, but sometimes you run into a problem and you just can't figure out what is causing it.
Right.
So that obviously requires a team effort to figure out, but it's really satisfying when you do get to that conclusion. So the biggest challenges are definitely things like, all right, all of our ingredients were right, all of the temperatures were right, all of the times in the procedure were right. Why is this product coming out wrong? So it's those sort of challenges that really can get so frustrating.
So it is a team-based type role that you do. It's not like a solo individual role.
No, it's absolutely team-based.
Nice.
So I work directly with probably 3 other people in the food tech department.
Yeah.
So there's other members of the quality assurance, there's our new product development people, and then there's our technologists that take care of safety. So it's absolutely a team effort.
Okay. And what do you love most about your role?
Can I say I love drinking the drinks that we make?
Really? You just get to try a whole bunch.
Yeah, I mean, of course I get tired of it after a while, but no, I really, really enjoy getting to be involved in every step of the food. So I get to have a look at our raw materials coming in when we're talking like bulk tons and tons, literally tons of sugar, and seeing what the specs of that sugar is, for example, then following that all the way into our manufacturing equipment, and then getting to test it at different stages of its development, and then getting to make it up to the final product, and then getting to look at the lab analysis on it. I love being involved in every part of the way because you see the whole development of just one small product and the amount of work and knowledge that goes into making just one thing.
Yeah, right. Okay. And a lot of the times, you can go do studies and then go into the workforce and it's completely different. Did you find that when you did this cert that there was actually transferable skills from what you learned there into your workplace?
Yeah, I definitely did. I think I'm fortunate in going into quality assurance from my course because a lot of what we learn in the lab is how to check if a product is to spec. So some of that, what we learned in my course was making sure your ingredients haven't been adulterated, or making sure that you're using the right times and temperatures and procedures for something. So that was really transferable for me because I got to see how that worked in the workplace by taking our samples from our procedure and then making it up the way that the customer sees it, and making sure that following the procedures that are listed in the lab and that I've learned in the course are going to come to that end result.
Yeah, very good. Okay. And to wrap it all up, if you were to give someone advice that was wanting to follow the exact same footstep as you and get into food technology, would there be things that you've learned previously that you're like, I wish I knew that before I started? And what would those be?
I would definitely recommend being more interested in what goes into your food. So even if you haven't done food tech and you don't really know what some of these ingredients are, look really closely at recipes or at the packaging on your favorite foods and just notice what does go into this, and start asking questions. Why does it have this gum? Why would you use a color like this and not that? What is that additive? And I think getting that curiosity really sparks the interest to find out how your food is made, why it's made that way, and maybe what could be done differently.
Yeah, amazing. All right, Tiff, thank you so much for the second time around. You've been absolutely amazing.
Thanks for having me.